Hiya. Okie dokie. So I'm just going to talk you through the key things that you should be doing for your language paper 2 exam, your final English exam tomorrow. So obviously, as you all know, there are 5 questions, and just like the advice I gave you on language paper 1, I would recommend that you start with your creative writing piece. So that's question 5. You won't have a choice. You will just be given one statement, and it will say something like homework is a waste of time and it just stresses students out and it shouldn't be set anymore. And then it will say write a whatever it is based on this statement, based on your views on this statement, and you've got to decide but whether you disagree or whether you agree, and then write about it. What I would say the first piece of advice is do not refer directly to the statement. So this isn't like language paper 1 question 4 where they want you to argue about the statement. It's just they're basically giving you a topic and you're supposed to write about it. There are 5 things that you could be asked to write. So 1, you could be asked to write an article, and it's usually for a broadsheet newspaper. I'll be stunned if it's anything else. So a broadsheet newspaper, and that article would need you to have a headline, and then the kind of tone that you would expect from a broadsheet newspaper. So relatively formal vocabulary, and informed and confident, sometimes direct address as well, so where you say you to the reader, that's quite common in kind of columns, and then sometimes you could do a bit of a humorous aside as well, because don't forget that with a broadsheet newspaper column, what they'd be expecting for an opinion piece is, yes, they want you to inform the reader, but they don't just inform, they also entertain. So you try and use a bit of humour or like an anecdote, which is like a little story to try and engage your reader. You could, instead of getting a newspaper, be asked to write a formal letter, but I would say again, similar kind of thing, apart from that, obviously no headline then, but instead you'd want to include like the date and the addresses, and then the dear sir or madam or whatever, and then the yours faithfully. So it'd be yours sincerely if you put their name, and yours faithfully if you don't. And then you might be asked to write a leaflet. If you get a leaflet, again, you'd have some kind of title and then subheadings. You can, with a leaflet, for some sections, put bullet points, but that's the only one you can do that with, really. So I'm going to down letter, article, leaflet. You could be asked to write an essay, though that, I mean, it hasn't come up yet, but that's just, an essay like the ones you do in literature. So you introduce your argument and then do your key points throughout, and then some kind of conclusion, and then finally you could be asked to do a speech, and that hasn't come up yet, I don't think, because last year it was a letter. So yeah, a speech to some, usually your peers or teachers, or some kind of, maybe a council or something like that. And again, you would be expected to do like an introduction where you introduce what the speech is about, and say, what you're talking about, and then finish it by saying like, oh, thanks for listening, I hope you take my message away, or whatever. So that would be question 5. And my key bits of advice for that really were, make sure you plan. You must plan. Aim for about 5 or so paragraphs, not much more than that. I wouldn't be writing much more than 1.5 pages to 2.5 pages. Anything more than that, and you're going to struggle to fit in the key things that you need to fit in and sustain it, and make sure it's crafted rather than just writing, because it's much better that you write a short, brilliant piece than that you write a really, really long, rambling piece. And then the things that you're going to get marks for, aside from paragraphing, so we talked about this last time, if you can either bookend, that works quite well with non-fiction as well, or if you can do like a 1-sentence paragraph or something like that, that would work very well. So that's your structure. And then in terms of other things like punctuation, so try maybe to crack a semicolon or dashes for emphasis. That would work really well. Brackets work quite well in this particular piece, because if you're trying to do a funny aside, brackets work really well for that. So any kind of humour like that, that would work. Someone's just asked whether you can plan on the paper. Yes, you absolutely can. You can label it as your plan, or you can just pop a little line through it, and that's absolutely fine. It's really clear as an examiner when it starts to be the prose, written prose, so that's fine. So you can plan on the paper, and usually people who plan on the paper do better than those who don't. I've already talked a little bit about the kind of vocabulary that you might want to use, and I probably, if I were you, would already be thinking about some of the kind of vocabulary I'd want to use already. So it's an opinion piece, yeah? So you're going to be saying like, oh, something's really good or something's really bad. So you can practice words for like, you know, I was talking to my students earlier actually about the word abhorrent earlier. So if something's really bad, it's abhorrent. Well, that's an easy word to put in regardless of what your opinion is and regardless of what the topic is, because you just say the opposite of what you think is really abhorrent. So it's those kind of things. So look up a few words maybe tonight to remind yourself of the ones, but the ones that you know. But what I would say is don't use words that you don't know. So just maybe like use a thesaurus to find a couple tonight that you do, just to remind you that you do already know, and then use those. So that's question 5. I'm not really sure there's much else to say about it other than don't just pack it with persuasive devices. Don't just do that, because actually that's not really what they want you to do. They don't want loads of stats and stuff. They want your voice. They want you to feel like the tone needs to be you're an interesting, informed person, and I'd like to hear a bit more from you. You know, like when you get a teacher who's really good at assemblies, or when you watch a politician do a speech and think, oh, actually, I don't hate you. It's that kind of a tone. And yeah, I would recommend that you do that one first. 45 minutes. Don't spend any longer than that on it, otherwise you're going to run out of time. I'm just going to look. This is my sausage dog, as an aside. Okay, so then you're going to get onto the reading section. Question 1 is you have to tick for, not tick actually, it's like you have to fill in a blob. And it's marked by a computer, so the examiners don't even see it. It's marked by a computer. You fill in the blob for the true statements. What I would recommend is you read the statements and then on the left-hand side, put a T and an F next to them, and then double check them, check you've got 4, and then fill in the blobs. That would take you, it's a 4-mark question, so that should take you 9 minutes, and that should include reading certainly all of the first extract and as much of the second extract as you can fit in on the time for 9 minutes. Then you move on to question 2. Question 2, lots of people don't do very well on it, but that seems bizarre to me because it's not a difficult question particularly. Question 2, so what we always say in my group is whatever question it is, that's the amount of paragraphs broadly you should do. So, you know, question 5, 5 paragraphs. Question 2, 2 paragraphs. Basically, they will ask you either to identify similarities or to identify differences, one or the other. So whatever they ask you to do, don't do the opposite. So if they say summarise the differences, only talk about differences, otherwise you limit yourself to half marks on the question. The other thing is that they don't just want general differences or general similarities, they want specific ones about a topic. So they'll say, summarise the differences in the way a topic has been presented. So for example, you know, if this was the dog, it would be like, summarise the differences between the 2 dogs. And there's only, unless you can count me, there's only one, but you know what I mean. So you might say this one is really very small, and then talk about that. And then the other one is very large, blah, blah, blah. When you do the summarise the differences, there are 3 things that you're going to get marks for. Number 1 is identifying a difference or a similarity, depending on which one they've done. The second one is textual detail, so that's quotation. I would recommend you embed those quotations within your differences. And the third thing is your inferences. So that's where you say what it makes you think about the text or about the topic, based on what the difference is. So the way that I would structure it would be to go statement about source A, which is different from source B, with your embedded mini quotes, and an inference about source A. Then move on to source B and embed the mini quotes and say why it's different, and then do an inference about how it's different. So maybe one is more something or one is less something else. That's question 2. Only about 2 paragraphs, like that times 2. You don't need to do loads because it's only worth 8 marks. So it's worth 8 marks. So the rule that we always apply is the amount of marks plus 5. So 8 marks plus 5 minutes, so that's 13 minutes. It doesn't give you very long, but it's not a high mark question, so don't be panicking about that too much. The next question is question 3. And question 3 is just a language question again. So just exactly the same as paper 1, question 2. And you get marks for 3 things. Subject terminology, which is your metaphor, simile, personification, hyperbole, noun, adjective, verb, adverb, participle, that sort of stuff. And ideally, you would preface those by describing them. So you might say the aggressive verb or the beautiful noun, that kind of stuff. And so that's one thing you get marks for, subject terminology. Second thing is the textual detail. So again, ideally embed mini quotes. That's the best way, and pick the most effective vocabulary. And ideally, if you can pick vocabulary like several bits that link together, that will help. Your textual detail seem judicious. And then finally, the most important thing that you get marks for is the effect. So you do the connotations of the language. So you pick out an individual word or an individual metaphor, and you talk or something like that, and you say, what does it make the reader think, feel, and imagine, and any connotations, any associations. To get the highest marks for that, you need to be doing a few things. So one, you need to use high-level vocabulary when you're talking about the effects, so that you're really specific about the effects. So I think I said last time, like, you wouldn't say mean, you'd say malicious. Don't just say ugly, say specifically what it is that would, like, how it's ugly. The other thing, to get that into the highest level, you'd need to be talking about like the cumulative effect of language. So the best thing to do is like, so they'll give you a topic again, and it'll be like, I don't know, so how does the writer use language to describe the painting? And you might think that the painting seems very expensive, and then you might also think it seems like it's really beautiful. So you'd write a topic sentence like, the writer presents the painting is very expensive, and then pick out however many bits of language you can that show that it's expensive. So they might describe it as exorbitant or priceless or whatever. And then you would do the connotations of those individual words. So you make a point and then support it with as many mini quotes as you can, with the textual detail and with the effects, but you must do the effects. The effects are singly the most important thing. 3 paragraphs ideally, but the way that the mark scheme works is that you just have to hit it once. So it's not a catastrophe if you just like, say, got 2 paragraphs in, as long as you're talking about multiple quotes. And the cumulative effect of language, how they build up an image, that would really help you get into the top band, because it shows that you understand really like how language works, so that you don't create an image of someone just by using one adjective or one noun or one verb. It's not how language works. When you're a writer, you're thinking about every word that you choose, and you build up an image. And so if you talk about the writer deliberately doing that, and you talk about building an image, that will get you more marks. And then finally, that would take you on to question 4. Question 4 is worth 16 marks, so that's a 21-minute question. And that one, they want you to, it's not dissimilar to question 2 really, but they want you, instead of talking about a topic, they want you to focus on what the writer thinks. So all the way through your whole English exams, or like all of them so far, you've been kind of talking about what the reader thinks, feels, and imagines when they read. But now you are trying to say why you think the writer wrote it. So what do they think? What is the writer's opinion? And that is a big part of the mark scheme. The other one is textual detail, no surprise, so again the quotations, and again you should embed those. And then you've got methods and their effects, and the comparison. So it's kind of like question 2, and there are 2 differences. One is that instead of focusing on a particular topic, you are focusing on what the writer thinks specifically, rather than just the general topic. So they won't say what is the writer, they won't say how does the writer present the school. They'll say what does the writer think about the school. So it's all about their opinion. That's the first thing. And then the second thing that makes it different is you have to include methods. So when I say methods, I mean just like in the language question, so you could do subject terminologies, adjective, noun, hyperbole, whatever. You can also do structure. You can also do paragraphing or punctuation or anything like that. So how do they do it? So essentially, question 4 is, how do the writers present their point of view? So what's their point of view, and how do they do it? So it's kind of like what and then how. So you might say, they think the school's really negative, they think that the children are really ill-behaved, and this is clear when they use the noun hell as a metaphor to describe the school. This has connotations of, and you would go on. And then you might say, however, and then compare it to the other one. So, you know, whatever it is that they're asking you to compare. So it's really similar to question 2, but you've got to focus specifically on what the writer is thinking and what their opinion is, and also you have to do methods. So some interesting or helpful sentence starters for those key questions. For question 2, you would literally just put in source A, and then whatever is about the topic, embed a mini quote, and then put this shows or this implies. So there'd be your key sentence starters. So in source A, however, in source B, and also this implies or this shows. Both of those would work really well. For question 3, you want to start with something like the writer uses and then use subject terminology. So the writer uses the noun, quote, to imply or to suggest or to connote. And then, of course, you've got the kind of obvious ones of this makes me think, this makes me feel, this makes me imagine, or if you want to be more sophisticated in the way that you're writing stylistically, because you're aiming for a grade sort of 6, 7, 8, 9, then instead of saying this makes me feel, you might say this evokes, or this creates an image of, so that you take out the first person, because it just makes it sound a bit more sophisticated. And of course you can use those adverbs as well, like interesting, notably, of course, those kind of things, and make your writing sound a bit more sophisticated. But it's important that you say the writer uses whatever subject terminology it is. And again, you can modify it. So the writer uses the or inspiring verb or something like that. This connotes, and then you go on. If you want to be aiming for that higher level for question 3, you want to pop in things like the writer develops this image, or this atmosphere is continued by the writer with the choice of. So you're developing, like showing, oh, I know that it's not just this noun that creates the effect, it's also in addition this adjective, and it's also in addition this adverb is that, or this metaphor, or whatever it is. And then finally for question 4, you want to definitely focus on what the writer's doing. So almost like all of you, not all of them, but almost all of your sentences need to be starting with the writer thinks, or the writer feels, or the writer presents, or the writer argues, or the writer evokes. Always be starting with the writer. So even if you can't remember the name, or you can't spell it or whatever from the text, just keep going back to the writer. And then you need to be doing that comparison. So you say, however, in source B, and then this is more than, or this is less than, because that's a nice way to compare. And finally, you need to make sure you include the methods. So how the writer's done it. So the writer uses, and then again, whatever subject terminology, and to connote. So they've done it to deliberately connote something. And that should get you the marks. People are asking me to do, what's it called, predictions. What I can do is predict the question, because I know what the questions are going to be, because they're the same pretty much every year. But I can't tell you what topics they're going to be, because it could be about anything in the world. But what I would say is that usually the creative writing piece for question 5, they try to use a topic that everyone will be able to access, because there's no tiers, as in like higher and foundation. And as a result, that means that they tend to pick something that's a little bit like easily accessible. So last year it was like, what role do you think parents should have? And sometimes it might be like, people should do volunteering, it will make them feel nice, or homework is not very helpful and you shouldn't set it, or mobile phones are bad for your mental health. Something that the vast majority of kids would be able to say something about. Pets are really lovely, they make you feel nice and everyone should have one. We should give more money to charity. Like, just stuff like that. It would be great if we were all better at recycling or something like that, and then you have to write about it. I do know which century they'll be from, so there will be a 19th century text. Tends to be a bit shorter and is usually a bit more difficult to understand. That's usually source B. And then the other source will be 20th century, I think, because I'm pretty sure the first one was 21st century. So I will be on Twitter the rest of the evening. If you've got any questions, I will be happy to answer them. My year 11s, make sure you revise those different sentence structures that I taught you this week, and I will see you in the morning. Goodman, make sure you come in the morning, and I'll just do a little one-to-one with you because I know you haven't been in. Same for you, George. All right, see you later. Thanks, guys. I'll be on Twitter if you've got any questions. Bye-bye.